So I feel like it has been so long since I have done a Falafel House podcast. I've removed myself from the bathroom. It has been such an incredibly long time since I have podcasted. I feel like I've been doing nothing but moving stuff for the last week, basically. And apparently, no one missed me because none of them are here to join me for this my re-entry into Falafel House. Hey, everybody, it's the Falafel House Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Kevin Cotillo. I'm the only one of your normal hosts who is here. So I'm not going to do the show alone. Don't worry. Don't turn off your podcast yet. I did bring in an expert. I guess I love to say that because I knew he'd get a laugh. John Bosch is here with me today. What's going on, John?
Not much. So if you're normal, does that make me abnormal since this is... Is that how it works, Kevin?
I think since the first time we've had you on the podcast, we've been calling you insane. So I think
that's probably true.
Yeah, the old fantasy insanity host himself, John Bosch, is here. We're going to talk about all of the playoffs, the matchups, and some playoff formats that we get into. But before we get started, John, I got to ask you, why do you think Sal and Steve decided to bail on me? Like, was there show? Look, admittedly, I haven't listened for a couple of weeks either. We had no internet. There was a whole big thing, but
I haven't listened either. No, I'm kidding.
Was their show that much better without me that like they just don't want to be around me now?
I just kind of assumed that since the playoffs are beginning, they were like, oh God, we can't deal with playoff Kevin again. All we're gonna hear is Patriots. So that's my assumption.
That's probably not a bad assumption. And you know what's funny is I'm kind of shocked that with the release of that article that came out today, that neither of them wanted to come on and hammer me about it. I mean, it was a big deal. There's a huge rift in Patriot Nation. Everyone's all going crazy. I'm shocked that they didn't want to come on and bust my chops about it a little bit, especially Sal.
Yeah, we'll see that they break up. I believe they'll break up as much as I believe Marvin Lewis was going to get fired or leave the Bengals. I'm in the camp of when it happens, that's fine. I'll believe it then.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't think Belichick's going anywhere, and I think based on what's been going on, that would be the most likely scenario. If any of them were to leave right now, it would be him, and I don't see it happening. Look, I've been a big Garoppolo supporter. You listen to the show, so I'm sure I've been high on him for a long time. I've been saying he's a top 15 quarterback in this league for the last 2 years, but so I get that Belichick would be pissed if he had to move him. I mean, but power struggles like that go on all the time in the NFL, and usually you hear about it. It is a big mess right away. This one gets swept under the carpet for a long time because it's the Patriots and they all know how to keep their mouth shut. Anyway,
the Patriots are on bye. There's got to be some news. It's pretty boring just to show players in a snowstorm. Like, you got to cover something else, right?
It's exactly what I said when we heard the story was coming out last night. I mentioned it in one of our many, many chats that, it's these games this weekend admittedly aren't super exciting. So they had to drum up a little extra noise. But you mentioned Marvin Lewis. So before we get into anything else, I have to ask you about that because, I mean, I've seen and spoken to some Bengals fans. And I guess they call themselves fans. We'll say that, but no one seems to be happy about this.
No, I don't think there's any. I have not heard from one Cincinnati fan, and obviously I live in this city and hear a lot about the Bengals. I haven't heard anybody react positively. So I assume Marvin Lewis is happy and Mike Brown's happy.
I don't even know if Marvin Lewis is happy.
That's true. He might not be. I don't know. But he's getting paid. He's getting paid for 2 more years. I know that. So
yeah, that's true. So I guess there is that. But I don't know that he doesn't seem like he was thrilled to come back.
It's a disaster. I've tried to tell every Bengals fan that I know, don't go to a game, don't buy a shirt, anything that you do to put $1 more in Mike Brown's pocket at this point. You're supporting it, and I think the note that I said was enabling incompetence is even worse than the actual incompetence. So I'm done with them. Like I quit on them early this year, and I ended up having a really fun year just with fantasy football. So
you're
not more fun.
you're not a Bengals fan, or you? Let's backtrack. Were
All
you at
right,
one
so
time? Were you at one time a Bengals fan?
oh God, yeah, I was a diehard. I would say probably 2 years ago when I started getting a little bit further into fantasy football, I was still of the mindset of I don't care if I lose every single fantasy game. If the Bengals win, I'm happy on a Sunday. But they have not shown to me that they care about their teams, about their team. So I decided I'm going to root for an owner that I know cares about the teams, which is me. So
There you go.
screw them. Like I've openly rooted for Steelers multiple Sundays this year. It feels really weird, but hey, when my team wins a game, now I'm really happy. And of course, I was against the Bengals, and then the idiots go out and win 2 games and drop their draft pick even further, like at a time when the season was over. Like, way to go. Good job. Good job. They're I reserve the right to jump back on. I have said that I will be a bandwagon fan. I am more than
That's
happy to
fair.
jump back on and support them because you know what? If they show signs of caring, then so will I. That's my
Yeah,
relationship with the Bengals now.
I can't argue with that. I can't blame you for that. It's funny. My wife is from Michigan. She is supposedly a Detroit Lions fan. She'll kill me. She'll kill me if and when she ever hears supposedly. But she's one of those fans. Kind of, she pays attention to it. She'll check the scores occasionally. She checks whether or not they won. She'll draft the occasional player from Detroit, on her fantasy teams and whatnot. But she's she doesn't watch every game, and she's certainly not upset when they lose. And I asked her that. We had this conversation this week, actually. I said, that's not being a fan to me. Like, that's not that you're not a fan of the Lions. You casually like the Lions. And
Yep.
And if they're playing anyone else, you'll probably root for them, unless it's maybe the Patriots, since you've kind of been converted. And she was like, "Yeah, but you don't understand what it's like to be a Lions fan. We've been beaten down so much." And I had to stop her and say, "Wait a minute. My entire childhood was
Oh God, move
horrible
no.
Patriots fan."
Everybody tune out. Steven Sal didn't want to come on. This is it.
Yeah, you're probably right. Listen, just real quickly though, they were so bad, and I watched them. And a lot of people around here did. Obviously, it's hard or easy to forget that when you're talking about what 15, 16 years of success here. So whatever. All right, we'll move on.
I would say like when the Bengals had their winning stretch, and they're not. I mean, their window's not closed yet. They still have talent if they actually just stop drafting wide receivers and running backs in the first 2 rounds and actually fill an offensive lineup with solid players. Idiots. But I mean, like, the city has a lot of fun when the Bengals are winning. People do get really into it. I don't think I've ever seen this kind of rage. And I lived through Dave Klingler, Achilles Smith.
Achilles Smith is the best.
I mean, like, at that point, it was fans were just like, they just gave up.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, like, fans got to the point where they were caring again. And now they seem almost enraged. Like,
yeah.
Which I guess means they're still passionate one way or the other, but I think they're really close to probably pushing the fans back to that point where they just don't care one way or the other.
So we'll bring this back to a fantasy perspective in a second, but I'm curious because do you think it's a systemic issue of the ownership all the way down? Because that's what it seems like from my perspective. And then I mean, you look at what they had. Think about the pieces they had on offensive line that they let go. And I'm not a Joe Mixon fan per se, but he had an okay rookie campaign. Think about what he would have done if they had kept that offensive line intact. They actually had good pieces.
Yep,
it's amazing to me.
Yeah, one of the pieces they just let walk went and solidified Los Angeles's line, and look what Todd Gurley did behind him.
Talk about throwing your money at the worst possible areas. I mean, anyway, all right.
It is straight from the ownership down. That's how it has always been. Mike Brown has zero interest in actually like investing to win. Like he just doesn't. I mean, he gets his check from the NFL one way or the other. And honestly, the impression about him has always been that he's cheap. And when he let those guys walk from, the offensive line, Zeitler and Whitworth, everybody was kind of surprised, but also not surprised.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was a terrible decision, and good job. You went out and signed. They never sign free agents because free agents don't want to come play for this organization. So to the draft, and they don't draft offensive linemen.
Yeah.
So I mean, they have in the past drafted some, but at a time
Well,
when they
hey,
really needed to, they went John Ross. Ugh.
yeah, it could be worse. You could have Mark Davis as an owner, and it's crazy to me that we're getting into the area where Mark Davis is almost matching his father in stupidity. I guess it's not matching, but it's a good thing Sal's not here because he'd probably be flipping out at me right now. But John Gruden, 10 years, $100 million. Whew, could be worse.
Yeah, I'm not really excited about that hiring. Like, are you?
Yeah. You know what? So here's the thing. From a fantasy perspective, I looked at it. As you know, I'm sure I just bought Cooper in a league. I paid pretty good prices for. You saw the deal. It was Jordan Howard, Amari Cooper, and Jake Butt. And I paid.
You bought Cooper from Sal.
From Sal. I think I paid probably good value for him. I mean, given the year that he had,
you got a steal. Yeah.
So my team's a contender in that league. I think, if Andrew Luck comes back, I should be in decent shape. And with those three guys, if I get anything out of Jake Butt, it's a plus. But with those, with Cooper and Howard, if they can give me anything resembling what they should be, I think I'd be in good shape in that league. But my point is about Cooper. I don't know. I think the offense could benefit from Gruden because he is a good offensive mind. I'm a little surprised with his offensive coordinator choice. Supposedly, he's bringing in his former offensive coordinator from when he left the Bucs. But he is an offensive guy. He might be able to score some points and at least install some schemes that'll work quickly. But long term, no, it's a terrible hire. It's an absolutely awful hire.
Yeah, there's no way he lives out that
No,
lives out. I'm sorry, he'll live it out. There's no way he plays out that or coaches out that contract, I guess is the term. But I mean, maybe he will. But I would be shocked to see him coaching the Raiders 10 years from now. And that doesn't seem like the way to go in the NFL these days. Like hiring a coach that
retreads.
He's out of the game. Like
retreads
sure,
are
he
almost always a bad
commentated Monday
idea.
Night Football, big deal.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you have to get that young. You're breaking up a lot, man.
All right, hold on. Should be fine. All right. What was the last thing that was clear? Am I still breaking up?
No, you're fine now.
All right. What was the last thing that was clear?
We were talking about retreads.
All right. So I'll just I'll pick it up and I'll give a small. Steve will figure it out. I'll give a small break and then I'll pick it up with retreads and you can just finish your thought on Gruden. All right. Yeah, I mean in the NFL, retreads are never really a good idea, especially one that's been out of the game. To your point.
Yeah, I mean, when there was a little glimmer of hope that Marvin Lewis wasn't going to return, all I'm thinking is please go out and get a young offensive mind. That's what I want. Go get. I mean, they openly said Josh McDaniels wouldn't be one of our candidates, and all I'm thinking is, well, yeah, that's the same as some guy that has no shot saying the prettiest girl at the bar isn't somebody he's going after. Obviously, the Bengals would never have a shot at McDaniels, but I'm thinking like go get Matt Nagy, something like that, and that would never hit the. You knew that was never going to happen in Cincinnati. I'm interested to see where Chicago goes. They haven't done anything yet, right?
No, not that I know of.
Like, and they're the same. They're kind of in the same boat with a young quarterback, young running back. I want to see who comes in there, who can go in there and be Sean McVay and take Jared Goff and Todd Gurley, and all of a sudden, boom, you've got this awesome offense. Not some old retread that coached forever ago. Like it's just that's not innovation to me. So
yeah,
that's what I want to see in the NFL more and more.
Like we said, it all boils down from ownership down. I mean, when you have bad ownership that makes that's in it for just a paycheck, as you referred to, it just doesn't work out. And I'm going to look at this. I'm going to bring it back to fantasy in that regard, because it really, when you're talking about fantasy, it's all about ownership, and you got to pay attention. Really depends on what you're in it for, right? I mean, when you're in it for the championship or you in it for the paycheck, usually they're hand in hand. So that kind of works out. But you got to be an invested owner. You have to pay attention, and you have to play with your mind on the game, so to speak. So particularly when it comes to fantasy playoffs or playoff fantasy, however you want to say it, John. I mean, we're all in a lot of leagues in the fantasy playoffs, and then they end, and you're week 17. Maybe you have a Pro Bowl, as Sal has discussed several times, and those are fun. But once the playoffs come, a lot of people think fantasy's over, and for us crazy people, it's not. It's just starting, and we got a lot of leagues that you've developed that have fantasy or NFL playoff fantasy implications. I thought we could start off and sort of talk about the games from this weekend by extension of these leagues that you've created. So I think I've mentioned them on this podcast several times, but there are 2 dynasty leagues that I joined this year, and I think I've told you a couple of times that I need an assistant. So I don't know where you are in the process of finding me an assistant to help me with these leagues, but the Empire League and the Supremacy League are 2 leagues that you created, multiple formats. So listen, if you guys are in a dynasty league or looking to get into dynasty leagues and you want to go completely crazy, because you have to be crazy to do it, you could think about creating a format similar to John's, and I'm sure you could hit John up on Twitter at Empire FFL, right? Is that right?
Yep,
Empire
that's
FFL?
correct.
Yep. You can hit him up, and he'll explain to you exactly how to do it. It'll probably take a couple of 3-hour phone calls, but you'll get there. But so John, backtrack a little bit and tell me how you first came up, because Empire was the first one, and I think Supremacy is a sort of a tweaking to Empire.
It is. Yep. It's the 2.0 version.
So how did you come up with a league that consists of, if I'm correct, 4 regular leagues, a DFS component, and then 3 playoff leagues?
Yep. Basically because I get second place a lot, it feels like. So I wanted something that kind of measured consistency across multiple formats of fantasy football. And long-term success. So, I mean, in these leagues we play, there's a payout for each format, each individual season, but the big prize, the big goal is building every single year for this huge pot where basically you get points based on how you finish in each individual format. And then those points all add up. If somebody sweeps all the formats, they win this huge pot, either the Empire or Supremacy pot, depending on the league. That's where the huge payout is. If nobody wins it, which I can't imagine sweeping every format. It's hard enough to win one, much less more than one. Yeah. And winning all 6 in a season, if it happens to me, I'll probably just retire right there and say, that's it. That was the best fantasy season I ever had. I will never top that. But after 5 years, since that's unlikely to be won, we'll pay out from that Supremacy pot based on all these points that you've accumulated. So, like you said, we have regular season head-to-head leagues. There's a best ball league, a DFS league, and then we do have playoff formats, none of which I created, by the way, or developed. They were all just things that I had, different playoff leagues that I had seen in other playoffs, other fantasy playoff things that I had joined, and I wanted to incorporate it all together. So we play in 3 different formats of playoff fantasy football each year. 2 of them are similar, but there's little bitty differences, and then one's very different. We can discuss the formats, I guess, but what was your thought when you saw these setups, when you jumped into these leagues?
So I'll tell you, when you asked me to be in Supremacy, I was still, I think at the time I was still
He was only in like 20 plus leagues.
I was only in a few leagues at the time. We talked about it on your show, and if you never listened, go back and check out some of the old Fantasy Insanities if you can still find them. I think they're still out there, right, John?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they're still out there somewhere.
So yeah, go check them out, because
on iTunes and Stitcher. I don't think that stuff ever goes away.
If you're ever interested in trying to create some interesting formats, John talks to anyone that sets up a league with an interesting format. So you'll hear from Ryan McDowell, you hear from Scott Fish, you'll hear from several others that created these leagues. You get a lot of ideas on how you can tweak your own leagues if you're in a dynasty format and you want to add some interesting nuggets to your league, interesting rules and changes. But so when you invited me to Supremacy, I think at the time I was halfway through my venture into adding as many leagues as I could possibly add in one season. And I looked at it and I thought, first of all, I looked at the group, right? Because I think it's
a good group. It is a really good group.
And you know as well as I do that when you take on any fantasy endeavor, particularly Dynasty, particularly something that's going to be extensive, you got to have a good group. So for me, I looked at the group and I said, yeah, I'll be in there because those are great people. There's a lot of good guys in there. And I think it'd be a lot of fun. And then you sent me the rules. And the rules are long. It's hard to figure out. I know that there's several people in the league that had to read them over multiple times. I still don't think I know them all.
Let's be honest. Most of those people have never read them once.
No, that's true. That's true. I
just read them about them repeatedly, which is fine.
I have read them, but I got to be honest. You can't even get that far with reading them because you get into it and you're like, well, wait, let me go back and look at the actual roster and league. So, they're tough.
I have to check them on my own constantly. Most of my leagues, I have my rules memorized, but for those ones, I mean, if somebody asks me a question, I can usually answer it, but then I say, I might have to double check that, but I believe in solid rule writing for a league. So.
You know what was more concerning to me is that we got to the end of the season and I had no idea how I did. I literally had no idea. Like I knew in the Empire League, I was bad because I inherited some tough teams and I didn't clean out the roster as well as I should have. And that I knew that one was going to be a project, but I had a free roll this year anyway. So, overall I knew I did bad there, but it's kind
of fun though at the end of the season though, when you know how you're doing in each individual format.
Yeah.
But it's kind of fun then when all of a sudden you see these rankings come out with the compilation of all the points that you earned throughout the entire season. Like that's, to me, like I love that day. I love getting the post rankings. It's so much fun.
It's awesome. And you know what? The other thing is when you do the startup for these leagues, there's like 8 different things to start up. So like it took us all off season to get it going, which was great. Like you had a new draft every week.
We were auctioning all off season. I'll miss that this year. We won't get to do that, but oh well. We're gonna do some. I mean, we'll still get to do plenty, but we won't get to do 2. We'll have 2 startups that we don't do.
I think we'll find ways to fill them. I'm sure.
Oh yeah, we have rookie and free agent stuff. Oh yeah, we'll still be plenty busy.
How many leagues are you joining this year?
Joining, well, I started the salary cap one that you, of course, immediately jumped into without even asking a question.
I liked how in our chat you were like, hey, I'm starting a new league, and me just yep, like don't ask anything else, just yep.
So I'm joining. I'm starting that one just because I like salary cap. To me I love it. Like that's literally my favorite. It is the hardest to commish. It's kind of a pain. But I'm figuring out ways to make it easier. So as I've made it easier over the past 3 or 4 years, I kind of figured I can take on another one and it won't be unbearable. And it's a great group too. Like it's going to be a lot of fun. I don't think I'm joining any. I will probably join Pigstry.
I was going to say, look, Scott keeps teasing us with this. Scott Fish keeps teasing us with Pigs 3 comments. You will join that, obviously.
That was the one I was like, seriously, Scott, come on, man. Like, I cut 2 leagues out this year because they weren't the most active, whatever, for whatever reason. So I wasn't planning on adding any. And then I did the salary cap run based on like one idea that got stuck in my head that I was talking over with Travis. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start a league around this one little single idea and doing it. And, it snowballed and it was it's going to be fun. One thing that we do in that I've started to do in all of my leagues now is incorporate like a little playoff challenge. So for that particular league, it's a salary cap. So you have $200 million salary cap. We are all going to compete in a little playoff challenge to win $1 million extra in salary cap. So no buy-in, not, the prize is really negligible, but it's fun because it's going to give the group something to talk about a little bit. We haven't even done the startup, obviously, in that league, but it'll give us a little bit to chat about as we're kind of forming the league. And I've tried to start instituting that in a lot of my leagues, a little playoff challenge that shouldn't take any time, but then people end up spending way too much time thinking about their roster and who to submit and everything. But for just not even like a real financial prize, but in our bankroll ones, you get an extra $5 bankroll bucks. It's, nothing special. It's just a little tiny prize, but it's something that I think keeps the league a little bit more active. People are still going to be watching football, gives them something to root about, gives them something to talk to each other about in the league chat. So that's one way I've really started using playoff fantasy football.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And for those of our listeners, because we have a lot of redraft listeners, obviously, and I'll tell you, you can do it in redraft too. Maybe you do a playoff league to incorporate into the draft order for the next year, or
that would be perfect.
Yeah, maybe you do something where it impacts your keepers in some way, shape, or form, or you lose it. You can. If you do a penalty for a keeper, where it's a round earlier, maybe you don't get that round if you win or something like that. I don't know. You can incorporate it in many different ways, or you could just throw an extra $5 down and keep the season going for the way to do it. The rest of the year. So
there's certainly plenty of ways to play with actual finances on the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely not discouraging that.
Nobody's worried about throwing a few shekels down on some football. That's for sure. So, all right. So let's talk about the formats a little bit, and we don't have to get into it too much. But basically, when you set up a playoff format, what you want to do is incorporate a way. So there's a couple ways to do it. You can either do we've seen it in multiple ways, but you can either do where you pick different players for each round, essentially. So each weekend you're drafting a new lineup. You can do it where you can only use a player once. Some leagues will do it where you only use a player twice. Some leagues will do it where you pick one player from each playoff team as it goes through, and that's it. You say, as John calls it in his leagues, the set it and forget it leagues, where you literally draft a lineup and you have that lineup throughout the rest of the format. I think Sal and Steve did a good job talking about Scott Fish's playoff league and pumping that up, and that's kind of his leagues, I think, are more towards the set it and forget it. Although I think you can only use a player once, right?
Scott's are the contest format. So on MFL, they call it contest format if it's where you can settle new lineup each and every week, and you can only use a player like once. That's that's like contest is kind of how I've started to term that, because that's how MFL terms it. So it's just easier to use that lingo. That's how Scott's is. It's great. And I mean, obviously his is raising a ton for charity. Yeah. That's a little bit more, to me, it's a little bit more in depth, because then you have to remember to go and set your lineup every single week. They're fun. Obviously I'm in Scott's and I have multiple that are like that. The set it and forget it are the ones that I like to use as just a little addition to a league.
Yep.
Because they're so easy. I mean, the way my set it and forget it is set up is there are 12 roster spots. There are 8 players in a lineup, essential. Well, there's 12. I'm sorry. Let me start that over. There are 12 players in the lineup. Now, you start everybody. So the first week, you're going to have 4 players starting on bye, but so is everybody else, because you're limited to taking one player from each NFL playoff team. You have to. So you have to take a Buffalo Bill. Sorry about your luck. You have to play a Bill.
Charles Clay. Yep. Just take Charles Clay and forget it.
Yep. Unless there's defenses. If there's defense, I think the defense might be the way to go, and hope that Bortles throws a pick 6 or something like that. So, I mean, to me, that's a really easy and fun way. People go in there, you set your lineup once, and once it's done for the entire playoff series. The points add up the entire playoffs. And in the Super Bowl, everybody has a player on each team then to root for. So, like, you're probably mathematically eliminated at some point, but you always have something to kind of root for if you have no other interest in the Super Bowl. When the Patriots do lose and Kevin doesn't get a root for the Patriots, you know what? He's going to have whoever the AFC representative is on this playoff team that he can pull for and dry his tears with.
So you know why I know you're lying, John? Because you can't even tell me who it's going to be that beats them. You can't even pick the team. You can't even. You just say whoever it is that beats them. You can't pick a team because there's no one as good.
Well, obviously, I picked Brady off of the Patriots because my leagues favor quarterbacks, and I want the Super Bowl quarterback. So, I will save him in all of the playoff challenges. I will use him in the set it and forget it as my Patriot because I want Tom Brady in the big game.
I did. You know what? I did that last year, right? In a lot of these set it and forget it. I went with the quarterbacks that I thought were going to be, because obviously it's a super flex league, so you're playing two quarterbacks. And I went with the two quarterbacks that I thought were going to be in the Super Bowl because those are obviously they play the most games. They got at least 3 matchups, if not 4, right? So, but the problem is, I don't know, it didn't work out well for me. So this year, and I'm probably screwing myself, right? Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I went with quarterbacks that I thought would go at least to the AFC and NFC championships, and that would play at least guaranteed 3 games that I think they're going to get there, and players that if I think they're going to the Super Bowl that'll still be productive. Like I think I picked Gronk from the Patriots because the guy's going to be productive no matter what. Even if Brady struggles, Gronk usually still has good games, and Brady has struggled throughout the year a little bit. So I think we can all agree on that. As much as I hate to say it, he's certainly not 6-0 like Garoppolo. So I think I picked Gronk, and then I'm looking at quarterbacks from this this week that might make it a few rounds. And unfortunately, it's hard to pick. But Cam Newton is a guy that I keep coming back to because I think there's a solid chance that Cam Newton plays 4 games.
And so that gets into the strategy of the playoffs, of playoff fantasy a little bit. Normally, when you're playing fantasy football, it doesn't matter who wins or loses on an NFL Sunday. Playoff fantasy, it becomes a key. The first thing you always have to do is basically fill out your playoff bracket. Which teams do you think are going to get there? Because you want those players that are going to play 3 or 4 games. So you said Cam Newton. Mm-hmm. See, I look at that matchup, and now we'll get to discuss that matchup a little bit. Panthers Saints. I look at it and say, I think the Saints have a chance to win 4 games, to play 4, not win, to play 4 games.
They absolutely do, no question about it.
I think it's them or the Panthers, quite frankly. I think they're the most likely representatives. Only because I can't buy into Case Keenum, but they get to play at home. Like they're probably like I haven't looked at the odds, but I'm guessing the Vikings are the favorite to get to the Super Bowl from the NFC. But to me, it feels like the Saints and Panthers, whoever wins that game is right there with them and is highly likely to play 3 games, which is the maximum that the Vikings can play. So that's the first thing I do when I set up a playoff challenge is try and figure out how many games each player is going to play. So that's good for the set it and forget it because then you maximize those at the right positions. Like you said, you went quarterback last year trying to get 3 games out of it. Whereas like in the contest leagues, it almost behooves you to get a player that loses. You want to have the best player on a team that loses, right?
Yep.
So like when you're looking at the Bills Jags game, which is just going to be ugly. You basically kind of want to punt your Buffalo Bill position, right? Like you have no interest, but since you have to play a Bill, you said Charles Clay. Where else do you go where you're like, oh, just play the tight end? That's super easy. There's nobody better on the team that it's even an alternative.
Yeah, obviously, LaShawn McCoy is a great player, but I think that when you're talking about this particular matchup where he's banged up, I think he's going to play. We're not 100% sure, but Jacksonville's phenomenal. The only area they've slightly struggled this year is against the tight end. So,
yep.
I think you have to go with Clay because of that. And It's hard to turn down LaShawn McCoy when you have him staring in your face. But then the other aspect of this is look at all the freaking running backs that are in this playoffs. I mean, you're talking about, look, you have Kareem Hunt, Todd Gurley, Leonard Fournette, Mark Ingram, and Alvin Kamara. You have Jonathan Stewart, who I guess, he's been serviceable this year, not great, but obviously you have Tiny Dancer, as we call him, on this podcast, on the same team. LaShawn McCoy, Devonta Freeman, Tevin Coleman, and even the broken down DeMarco Murray and his counterpart Derrick Henry, who needs to just get the ball. I mean, this is an amazing group of running backs in these playoffs this year. So I think that's why McCoy's on the outs.
Oh, for sure. I think looking across the line from him in that same game, I think Leonard Fournette might be the play for the Jaguars. Like,
yeah, I mean, agreed.
He's going to get so much work. He's so consistent, and I got to believe the Jags are going to win that game, which I think then they face the Steelers, right? Like that's their next matchup.
Yeah, should be.
So,
yeah.
If you start looking ahead, you're looking at 2 games where he should get pretty solid production. I think there's an outside chance that the Jags could beat the Steelers. I don't really expect it. I mean, I think the Steelers are definitely going to be in the AFC Championship game. But of the AFC wild card teams, I think the Jags have somewhat of a chance to get that 3rd game. So to me, I try. Yeah, I mean,
I got to give it to Kansas City as far as the chances of these four.
I think they both have a small chance, but I don't see either of them really getting the 3 games. Do you?
Here's the thing. I think that Kansas City, even coming to New England, makes me a little nervous. And as a Patriots fan, I may lose my card by saying that, but we've struggled against that team. They play us very tough, and they play us in ways that we have difficulty defending. Obviously, you saw what happened in the opening game this year. And so Kansas City makes me a little nervous as a Patriots fan. So I could see them, I'd give them a little bit of an edge over Jacksonville playing a Pittsburgh team that looks really good at home as well. So I think of the 2, you're right. They both have a small chance. I think Kansas City has a little bit better of a chance, just given the matchup that they'll face and how they've been able to win that matchup previously.
Yeah, I think you're doing the reverse psychology thing on the Patriots there, because I just don't see a team going into Foxborough and winning.
Let me ask you this: Did you think that the Kansas City Chiefs were coming in week 1 and winning against the Patriots in Foxborough?
Not really, but that's regular. That's regular season. Like this is playoff time. I mean,
yeah, this is really where they shine. So I look, I agree with you. I do think if that's the matchup that occurs, your Tom Brady pick's going to be pretty damn solid, because he should light them up. They've been terrible against the pass. So
I think going heavy on Chiefs that week, if the Chiefs get to play at against New England, if they make it there, that's the week that I want to attack a lot of Chiefs players, because I think that game will be high scoring, and I think the Chiefs will lose. So I want the high scoring players that lose, and then I'll use the Patriots, the next week or the week after that. That's kind of how I start looking at these playoff challenges.
So all right. So let's go back a little bit, because we talked about the running backs. You said Leonard Fournette as a lock. I agree with you completely, because he's a chance to play going forward, but even if you're just doing the 1 week, matchups, I think he's got a great week. Buffalo was, I believe, last in the league against opposing running backs this year. So I think that's a great pick. I'm also pretty high on Devonta Freeman this week. I think the Rams are going to win that game, I guess.
How's his practice? I haven't checked this. I haven't checked the practice.
I believe he did return to practice earlier this week, so he should be okay.
I think he was limited. He was limited, I thought, on like Wednesday or something.
Yeah, I expect it. I mean, look, it's, if they limit guys.
That's the vet day.
Yeah, that's the vet day. I expect him to be out there. Obviously, you want to check everything when it comes down to the wire, but I found myself playing a lot of Devonta Freeman, and interestingly enough, I found myself playing my boy Austin Hooper a little bit in a couple of different places as well, just because of the way that things worked out and how I had already used some running backs and, didn't have a solid tight end anywhere. So those are the two guys from that team. But I am pretty excited about Devonta Freeman. Los Angeles was pretty bad against the run this year as well.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a very good play from the Falcons. I think this week, that game should definitely be high scoring. I think we have 3 games that could be a pretty good scoring. Now, granted, the Panthers Saints, this is the third time they've played, and the whole narrative of the time people play the third time, it's always a little bit less when their divisional opponents facing off. But I still think those teams can put up numbers. They've got exciting players. I think they can put up numbers. Bills, Jags, avoid. You said Devonta Freeman. I'm curious, are you going to play Julio in any of these playoff challenges?
Yeah, I do have him in one. I don't know. I don't love it because I don't know that.
So the reason I have him in some places is receiver is tough to find this weekend.
Yeah.
Like it's hard. It's hard to find. You've got Tyreek Hill. You can pick one of the Rams receivers, throw a dart and see if you get the right one, or maybe they all explode, which would be really nice.
I actually did go with Rashard Matthews in a few places, just because I think they lose, and I think that that's a guy that might put up some points.
I had him, and I shifted to Derrick Henry because with DeMarco Murray out, I think Derrick Henry's just going to get the ball 8 out of every 10 times the Titans take a snap.
He should.
I mean, he probably should, or Mariota should, actually run with the ball occasionally. That'd be kind of nice to see. But
how funny would it be if Tennessee was playing Jacksonville, and obviously you'd have that same 3-time narrative, but at the same time you'd have two teams that only want to feed their running back. You could see like 70 carries for 70.
Be like a 9-6 game in overtime.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Oh, that would not be great. That would be so boring.
Yeah, terrible game. But if you had those running backs in fantasy, you'd be in some in good shape. So, I think Rashard Matthews, to answer your question, I think he's the guy that I like a little bit here. I'm not touching anyone in Carolina. I'm not touching anyone. I do like Michael Thomas.
Yeah, he's the one that I've got everywhere, I think.
Yeah, I think I put him in a lot of lineups because Carolina's been terrible against wide receivers this year, and he has been so good this year in fantasy football. I mean, if he had a couple more touchdowns earlier on in the season, he would have been the number one fantasy wide receiver this year. It was unbelievable how well he did when you look back at the numbers. He had a ton of receptions. I don't have his full numbers in front of me, but still, but had a great year. And I think the touchdowns in the beginning of the part of the season really held him back. But once he started scoring those, he was gold. So particularly love this matchup. But even going forward, he's a guy I'd be comfortable with from that team. Hard to pass up Kamara, but I do think that Thomas will be good.
Yeah, and that's with the set it and forget it, where you only get to pick one player from a team. That's what burns me when I pick Thomas. I mean, because then I don't get Kamara or Ingram or Drew Brees. I don't get to play any of those 3, and I would like to have some of each of them. But that's why you play the contest lineups, and you get a shift. You shift around. What team? Let me ask you this: what team are you worried about that you're going to try and save the players from, and then they might lose their first game? And you just basically don't get anything from them.
Kansas City's the one that I am the most concerned with because actually, no, that's a lie. New Orleans is up there. New Orleans is up there because I will save players from New Orleans. Like I said, I have Michael Thomas in a lot of places, but if it's a situation where I have to save players, Kamara and Ingram are guys that I'm saving for later. But I do think Carolina could win that matchup. So I think that that's one that you could get hosed on. I still think Michael Thomas is a great play this week. So if that's the format and I had to pick one or the other, I don't think you're losing out. But yeah, that's the one that I think could be one and done. And then Kansas City. Look, Tennessee has played terribly over the last month, I think, personally. I don't like the way they played. And, but maybe if Murray is out and that actually does help them signal one carrier and they can actually run with it. But I don't know that they have the defense to keep up with the Kansas City offense. So, yeah, it would be tough if you left a guy like Kareem Hunt for another round, or even Tyreek Hill, who this should be a decent matchup for, and then just didn't get to play him, or Travis Kelce. Yeah, those are three players that I would want to use, and I don't know if I'm using him this week necessarily. So.
Yeah, so I'm in the same boat there. Whichever way I go with the Panthers and Saints, like whichever team loses, I'm gonna lose out on players. Like I'm not gonna have Christian McCaffrey, or I'm not gonna have Kamara. And in PPR, Christian McCaffrey is very good. Like he's not exciting. He doesn't get goal line touches, which is annoying as all get out. But he still gets points, and so it's somebody in that game is going to be the one that burns me, and it makes me almost want to play like an entire stack of just that game in one of these contest lineups. But of course, if you do that, then you might miss out on Todd Gurley's best opportunity to put up points. If he wins this week, he gets Minnesota next week. Like if you only get to pick one Todd Gurley game, in the contest format, which one do you want? Do you want it against Atlanta at home, or on the road against Minnesota? For me, I'm burning Gurley up right now. I'm using him just in case they lose too. Like I'm not going to not use Todd Gurley, have him put up 40 points, and everybody else used him, and I'm sitting there going, well, that's not fun. I just good thing I played, Robert Woods or Jared Goff, which I'd like to play Jared Goff too.
I really wanted to play Jared Goff. I could not pull the trigger on that. I'm with you. You can't let Gurley score 40 points. You can't let everyone else have him. You just can't, because he's going to be one of those heavily owned players for week 1 of the playoffs. So you have to put him in there. It's almost like a, unless you need to be contrarian for some reason, but watching a 40 burger go out the door is not a lot of fun. So I think you have to play him. I agree with you there. All right.
Let me step back so for people that were listening 30 minutes ago and going, why do you play in 3 different playoff formats to decide the overall playoff format of this overall then huge, bigger league? This is why, because like there are the playoff formats, the individual playoff formats are so different, like in how you decide to make your plays. So when I was setting up these leagues, I couldn't pick one that I liked more than the other. That was what it came down to. And I was like, all right, well, we'll just play them all, because why not? We've already gone way overboard. What's a couple more lineups to set for a few weeks? But it allows you to do, if the Rams win, maybe there's upsets, and maybe I'm hurt for quarterback next week. I mean, obviously I'm going to have the bye teams. I'm going to have them all coming in, but I don't really want to play Nick Foles next week. I don't really want to play Case Keenum. I probably will. I have
Keenum. I have Keenum in a few places, as far even in set it and forget it, because I do think they might make the Super Bowl.
I kind of think that too. So I'll probably play him, because I'm going to try and save Roethlisberger and Brady. Ideally you get the champion, the conference championship week, and you have all 4 of the quarterbacks, because then you get a really easy setup of you're guaranteed to have one quarterback from the Super Bowl if you're playing out your weekly contest lineup correctly.
Yeah,
so keeping your player pool is extremely important as you're progressing through those.
Yeah, the problem is you're so far down the list that you can't get back in it.
Yep,
and that's where I found myself last year. I had good options for the end, but I was too far back.
That's the double-edged sword. You don't want to miss out on the big game. And that's why, like, one of them's even titled, that's Tim Keller that gave those my little formats names. And one of them even says, like, save it for the big game or something like that. Like, because that's the goal of that, is you have to hit on the big game for the guy. You do want to save them. You want to save them to have those options, but not at the cost of losing, like you said, a 40-point game. I mean, that's just, who else do you think could have the potential of a 40-point game looking at this weekend's matchups other than Gurley? I think everybody believes he has a possibility for a 40-point game.
Yeah, he's a 40-point game
every
option
week.
pretty much every week at this point, the way he played this year. I
Not
think
next week at the Vikings.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, with Gurley, I wouldn't put it past him. I mean, I'm not banking on it for sure, but I'm certainly not
he's
putting
amazing.
it past him. The guy's a stud. I think for me, it's Fournette this week. I think he's the other guy that really has the opportunity to go all out in this week. And I know he's been banged up this year, but I expect them to really, really give him a lot of run. I can see him getting 25 to 30 carries easy against a defense that really, really struggles. When they traded, who was it, Marcel Darius earlier? Was it Darius they traded? Yeah, that's who they traded. So when they traded him earlier this year, ever since then, they just went downhill with stopping the run, and they finished last in the league in that category. So I think Fournette's the clear play for me. I mean, the sad part about it is there's really no fantasy analysis there, because who else were you going to play on Jacksonville? I mean, maybe Marquise Lee, who's had a pretty decent season, although he's been kind of banged up. And, a lot of people were on the D.D. Westbrook bandwagon, and then he burnt them with zero catches or whatever, and, things like that. So I think everyone's going to play Fournette anyway, but
probably.
But he's the other guy that has a 40 burger in him, in my opinion.
So in some of our leagues, we get tight end premium. So in a lot of these setups, you have to play like 2 tight ends. Like that's almost forced into some of these to make tight ends important. Where are you going at that? Because obviously I'm locking in Kelsey this week. Like he's locked in I think every single one of my formats.
Yeah.
Even set it and forget it. Like I'm going Kelsey to get this week plus anything else.
Well, you could turn down Hunt. You turn down Hunt I get it, Kelsey. I get it.
I turned down Hunt because there's so many other options at running back.
Yeah,
I think I might have switched it up and gone Clay on a couple of them so that I could use Tyreek Hill. But I'll use Hunt in the contest formats. I won't use Hunt in the set it and forget it, just because of the amazing other options there are at running back, which that could literally kill me, because he's capable. Obviously, we all know he's capable of 40 points a week too. And if I don't get that and somebody else does, that's going to burn me big time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Kelsey's hard to pass up too, because the tight end is usually so thin. Although in this particular, playoffs, as I mentioned, I like Charles Clay. I like Austin Hooper. Hard to pass up the Julio and Devonta Freeman, but Hooper's a guy that I think can score, because Los Angeles was pretty bad against tight ends this year. And Delaney Walker is another guy that against Kansas City could have a pretty solid day. They won't throw much, in my opinion, but they may have to at the end of the game. And, Rashard Matthews and Delaney Walker are really the only options that have been somewhat usable this year. So those are the guys.
They'll still run the ball.
Probably.
They'll still just turn the ball and turn around and run. Tennessee has little creativity.
Yeah.
So they'll just continue to. So let me ask you this. How do you, when you get one of these and, you do your playoff bracket, do you then work backwards from the Super Bowl to now, thinking of players that you want to save? Or do you look at each week and say, I want to get this guy because this is the matchup for him? What's your process in going through this?
So last year,
we've overthought this way too much already.
Oh, there's no question about it. But this is we'll talk about our strategies and how we build our lineups and things like that, and then that'll be a good way to wrap it up and get out of here. So I'll tell you, last year I did exactly that. Right, I built my bracket. I went from Super Bowl back, and I built my team for set it and forget it. I also identified all of the good matchups and sort of then pinpointed who I wanted to play in each game, and built the lineup for each week for the other formats. So I did all that work last year, and I did okay, but I was certainly not at the top of the charts in any of the formats. I don't think I won any of them. So this year, as a matter of necessity, because I had no internet for a week because of this whole moving process, I didn't have a whole lot of time to do a lot. And when I did have time, I was exhausted. So I got to be honest with you, this year, I just said, forget it. I'm just going to wing it. Like, I'm going to look at the matchups for this week, kind of think of, off the top of my head, who I think is going to win and who's going to go where, and then sort of build it that way. And I So I really just based my knowledge off what I knew from the season. I did check out, fftoday.com has great stats for, you can look up, obviously, points
Logs,
against,
everything.
yeah, all of that stuff. So that's a great site to check out. And I go there and just kind of, I guess I wing it. I guess this is what my strategy this year. It can't be any worse than last year where I finished like, middle of the pack. So I'll either be last or first. So, and I'm fine with that. What about you?
I do the same thing. I fill out the bracket. And then I work backwards from the Super Bowl. So it depends on which format it is. If it's set it and forget it, the first thing I do when I do the bracket is I count up how many games each team's going to play. And then, the teams that are going to play the higher number of games, in my opinion, that's where I try and attack the higher scoring positions and get the elite players from those games. Tom Brady's going to get 3 games. I either want him or I want Gronk from the Patriots. They're the consistent ones. I'm not taking a running back who might be awesome in 2 games and have a 0 in another. I'm not going Brandon Cooks in somebody that's going to play 3 games. If it's a team that's only going to play 1 game, I might go for a boomer bust player. I don't know that we really have a great example of a boomer bust player from
Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, maybe. but I don't think they're going to play just 1 game. That's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah,
if it's a team that's only going to play 1 game, I don't think we have a boomer bust. I guess Derrick Henry could he could. I mean, he could have a couple of 50-yard runs, something like that. And that would be, a guy that I'm okay playing off the Titans because I don't really expect to get much else from the Titans. The Jags, the Fournette, that's easy, obviously. If they didn't have him as such a, a free square is what they call it in DFS all the time. If they didn't have him, I would target a guy that might get a 0, might get a high number. So
yeah, Rashard Matthews is a guy, like I said, I played him a lot. He's kind of a boomer bust. You could see him doing nothing, but I think that he'll be targeted. So
yeah, so that's, I mean, I as for the contest leagues, I definitely try to think which game is going to be a high scoring game and when do I want to use the player. So I have it mapped out. Obviously that map will have to be burned after week 1 when I probably get 3 of the 4 games wrong. It's every game this weekend seems so obvious as to who the winner is, except for maybe the Panthers Saints. I think that one's going to be close. But the other ones, I mean, it should be obvious that the home teams win, right? They're overwhelmingly, they should win. Yeah. Maybe Atlanta takes out St. Louis. But of course, that's what I'm planning on is all the home teams winning. That's my plan. So then that's just going to be blown up, and all the planning that I did to set up, all right, week 1, I'm going to use this pool of players. Week 2, I'm going to use this pool of players. Week 3, this. And then by the time the Super Bowl comes around, I'm still going to have all my Patriots players to plug in, and I can go full Patriots onslaught in the Super Bowl. And when Tom Brady has 3 touchdown passes, and one's to Brandon Cooks, 2 are to Gronk, and Deion Lewis runs in for 1 too. I'm getting every single one of those touchdowns, and I'm going to walk away with this playoff championship, right?
Right. And then I get to see my team win another Super Bowl, and it all works out for me. So
that was in a losing effort. That wasn't a comeback, just like last year, a comeback but this time it's going to fall a little short, right?
Interesting. All right. So one final tip before we get to some finishing thoughts that John brings up a good point as far as figuring out who the matchups are that you think are going to be high scoring. Great reference for that is obviously Vegas. Always check your lines. Go see what the over-unders are. The higher they are, the better it is for you. Look at who they have at winning the game, who's favored. That'll help you figure out who's going to advance because Vegas knows what they're doing. They're not in the business of losing money. So more often than not, their lines are pretty accurate. So use those tools that you have available to you. So, all right, John, thank you very much for coming on the show tonight. I really appreciate it since Steve and Sal bailed on me in my returning effort. But why don't you give us a finishing thought? You get to be both Steve and Sal for the night. So you can give as much finishing thought as you want.
Oh, sorry. Something just came through there in my ears. It was unpleasant. Can you hear me?
Yep, I gotcha.
Okay. All right, I'll pause then so that Steve can take that out. All right, I have to be Sal and Steve. That sounds like a very unique, we'll call it, combination. No, I think I'll just try and avoid that altogether, and I'll just be me. No, if this is going to be out, hopefully in time where you can still go sign up for Scott's Playoff League, maybe. I don't know. Is it?
It'll be out probably by the end of the night tonight. Steve's pretty quick.
Perfect. So if you're listening to this on Saturday morning, go ahead and sign up. Go to Fantasy Care, sign up for it. If you're doing it Saturday, I would say probably go ahead and message Scott so that he can get you in there quickly. Make sure it's. I don't know what his cutoff is. We probably should have looked at that.
That's all right.
But if you haven't done one of these, go to what is it? Is it NFL.com? Yeah, NFL.com. Like they have a playoff challenge too. We didn't even talk about that format where they have multipliers. Like if you use the same player all the way through, they multiply their points every time they get played for a second or third week, something like that. So that's an interesting one too. Do something, play something that's fantasy related, test something out if you've never done it, and then try and figure out a way to incorporate it into a league next year, whether it is just putting down a few extra bucks with your actual league mates, or if it's to play for some silly little prize within the league. Anything that causes a little bit more fantasy is good. So just keep playing.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Thanks again for coming out. You can follow John at Empire FFL on Twitter. He's John. Where can they find you aside from Twitter? You got so many things going on right now. I don't even know where to get you. Obviously, the Dynasty Game Night is one of my favorite podcasts, so check that out. You and Matt Price do a great job hosting and challenging. I'm waiting for the championship bracket. I don't know when that's going to happen, but.
Yeah, that'll have to get set up at some point. I'm going to say Matt's in charge of that. That's why it's not done yet. Because
there you go. Because he's not here.
Most of the people that are in that are people that defeated me, so I'm not too interested in having them back again. Yeah. So Dynasty Game Night. I'm also on Dynasty Happy Hour. Obviously, I like Dynasty a little bit, and then I write for another Dynasty Trade Calculator. So I do try and.
You have good writing over there.
Yeah, that's what I hear. Most of the writers that do things there are fantastic, from what in my opinion. Most of them. So that's where you can find me. Game night is maybe once a month. We aren't super frequent because Matt's super busy, and obviously I have some things going on too. Happy hour should be weekly. Now that the holidays are over, we're hoping to get back next week and become weekly again. And then my Dynasty Value Index series, that's, let's call it semi-weekly.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on how much time I have before I write that up. It takes a little bit of research to figure out all the values and who's gone up, who's gone down in the trade calculator. But I'm having fun doing that. So I appreciate you having me on, Kevin. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. No problem. All right. And my final thought, I just want to remind everyone to add some charity. You can do that by going to fantasycares.net and adding Scott Fish's Playoff League if you haven't already. If not, you keep an eye on it and get into the stuff he's got going on for next year. He did some great things for Toys for Tots this year and just only looking to increase that next year. So do that. This has been the Falafel House Fantasy Football Podcast. You can find Falafel House at Falafel House on Twitter, falafelhouse at gmail.com. You can email us with any questions or any feedback. You can rate us, review us on iTunes and anywhere you get your podcasts. And I messed that up way more than Steve, so I'm going to just hit the button.
I was going to even say, Steve, hit the button. Encore, encore, encore.